I still remember that morning in Denver, Colorado, as if it happened just yesterday. The sun was barely creeping over the rooftops on Maple Street, painting the houses in soft gold. From my bedroom window in our old two-story house, I could see the neighborhood slowly waking up. The sound of dogs barking, the faint rumble of garbage trucks, and the chatter of neighbors preparing for their workday gave the morning its usual rhythm. I sat with a steaming mug of coffee in my hand, enjoying the rare moment of peace. My life had never been quiet, not with my younger sister, Alice, around. Alice was the kind of woman who seemed to walk with a storm tied to her back. Wherever she went, trouble followed. She had an energy that could light up a room, but most of the time, that energy burned in all the wrong directions. I had always been the calmer one, the responsible sister who balanced the bills, fixed what was broken, and kept our lives from falling apart completely. Living with her was like living with a spark next to a pool of gasoline. I loved her, but I never trusted her. That morning, Alice barged into my room without knocking. She stood at the doorframe with her wild brown hair falling over her shoulders, her eyes lit up with the kind of mischief I had learned to dread. She didn't even greet me. Instead, she went straight to her demand. "Give me your car keys," she said flatly, as if it were already decided. I didn't even flinch. We had gone through this routine before. Alice always wanted something, money, clothes, or, in this case, my car. I kept sipping my coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. "No, Alice," I finally said, calm but firm. "You're reckless. You've gotten tickets before, and you don't take care of things. I'm not letting you drive my car." Her eyes narrowed instantly, her lips twisting into a scowl. "You're unbelievable. It's just a car. You act like it's made of gold." I shook my head and set the mug down on the windowsill. "It's not just a car. It's a responsibility. Something you don't understand." She crossed her arms and stomped her foot like a child. "Fine," she snapped, and stormed out of my room, slamming the door so hard that a picture frame on my wall rattled. I sighed, closing my eyes for a moment. I thought the argument was over, just another fight that would cool down once she found someone else to distract her. But deep down, I should have known better. Alice never accepted no. The day went on quietly after that. I did laundry, cleaned the kitchen, and caught up on some paperwork for my job. By mid-afternoon, I went back upstairs to grab something from my nightstand. That's when I noticed it. My car keys were gone. At first, I thought maybe I had misplaced them. I searched the dresser, the pockets of my jeans, and even the kitchen counter. Nothing. My stomach twisted, and my heart began to pound. I rushed to the window just in time to see Alice outside. She was sliding into a silver car parked at the curb, a smirk on her face like she had won some battle against me. My chest tightened as the engine roared to life. Within seconds, she sped off down Maple Street, leaving behind a trail of exhaust. At first glance, it looked exactly like my Ford, the same silver paint, the same shape, even the same tinted windows. But something about it didn't feel right. I froze at the window, my mind racing. Was that even my car? I couldn't be sure, but panic gripped me anyway. My little sister had stolen my keys, ignored my warning, and driven off into the city, like she owned the world. Hours dragged by with no sign of her return. Every tick of the clock made my nerves tighten. I tried calling her phone, but she ignored every call. Around dusk, just as the sun slipped behind the Rocky Mountains, the front door slammed open. Alice stumbled inside, her face flushed, her hair a tangled mess, and the faint smell of smoke clinging to her clothes. My heart skipped a beat. She didn't say a word at first. She just glared at me, her eyes blazing with defiance. Then, without warning, she tossed the keys at me. They struck my cheek and fell onto the carpet. "Your car," she spat, her voice dripping with venom, "is no longer of any use." I bent down slowly, picking up the keys, staring at them in my hand. My heart should have sunk, but instead, something inside me cracked open, and I laughed. A deep, uncontrollable laugh spilled from my chest. Alice frowned, taken aback by my reaction. "What's so funny?" she demanded. I leaned against the wall, laughing harder, shaking my head. She had no idea, no clue about the truth she had just stumbled into. She thought she had destroyed my life by destroying my car. But the reality was far worse for her, because that wasn't my car at all. I looked at her, my laughter finally softening into a grin. She stood there confused, still breathing hard from whatever chaos she had left behind. She had no idea she had borrowed more than just trouble. She had stepped straight into a disaster waiting to happen, one that would change everything for both of us. And that, I thought to myself as I watched her storm off to her room, was only the beginning. When Alice tossed those keys at me and walked away, she believed she had ruined my world. She thought she had destroyed my car beyond repair, leaving me with nothing but ashes and regret. But as I stood there holding those keys, I couldn't stop the laughter bubbling up inside me. I laughed because I knew something she didn't. The car she had taken wasn't mine. It belonged to Officer Richard Miller, our neighbor across the street. Richard was one of those men who carried order around with him like a second skin. Every morning, he left his house at 6:30 sharp, his navy uniform pressed, so clean you could almost see a reflection in it. He'd nod politely to the neighbors as he climbed into his car, a silver sedan that gleamed under the Colorado sun. It was nearly identical to mine, so much so that even I sometimes paused before realizing which car was which. But there were differences. The polished rims, the spotless windows, the way Richard's vehicle seemed to shine as though it had never seen a day of dust. Alice, blinded by her impatience and arrogance, hadn't noticed the difference at all. Richard lived alone in that tidy house with the white porch and the blue shutters. His wife had left years ago, and with no children to soften him, he poured all his discipline into his work, his home, and his car. That car wasn't just a mode of transportation to him, it was his pride, his legacy, and perhaps even his substitute for the family he never built. He spent weekends polishing the chrome, adjusting the engine, and making modifications so intricate that most mechanics wouldn't have understood them. But what Alice couldn't possibly know was that Richard had also installed a hidden camera inside. It wasn't the bulky type you see in movies, dangling from the ceiling. No, this was a sleek black device, no bigger than a coin, discreetly tucked near the rear-view mirror. You wouldn't notice it unless you were searching for it, and Alice, reckless as always, hadn't been searching for anything. She was too busy celebrating her small rebellion against me. Later, I would learn exactly what that camera captured. Every second of her crime was preserved in crisp footage. The way she slipped into the driver's seat with that smug grin, the way she pulled out a duplicate key she must have had made months ago, and the way she revved the engine, as if daring the world to stop her. I could almost hear her laugh echoing through the speakers when the footage played back. Alice was always daring, always reckless, but this time she had crossed into dangerous territory. The camera saw her speeding down Colfax Avenue, weaving in and out of traffic like the city streets were her personal racetrack. It saw the pedestrians who jumped back onto the sidewalk, cursing her under their breath. It caught the moment her tires screeched against the pavement as she lost control, her hands gripping the wheel too late, her face flashing with panic. And then it captured the crash, the sickening crunch of metal against brick, the sudden burst of smoke, and finally, the flames licking upward as the car caught fire. I didn't witness it myself, but I saw it later through Richard's furious eyes when he showed me the footage. And even then, even knowing it was my sister behind the wheel, I felt a strange calm. Because the truth was, that car had never been mine to lose. What made the situation worse was the car's value. To anyone else, it looked like a standard sedan. Nice, yes, but not extraordinary. But Richard had spent years turning it into something far more. He had modified the engine with imported parts from Europe, reinforced the frame with specialized steel, and installed technology that wasn't even on the market yet. That car was his masterpiece, his treasure. He once bragged, though only half seriously, that if he ever sold it, it would fetch at least $2 million. At the time, I thought it was an exaggeration. But when appraisers later confirmed the figure, my jaw nearly hit the floor. $2 million. Richard had poured everything he had into that car. His savings, his pension, even a loan in pounds from his brother who lived in London. He had risked his entire future on a machine he believed would one day make him wealthy. And the cruelest twist of all, he didn't even have insurance on it. Not a dime of coverage. He always said insurance companies were a scam, that they bled hardworking men dry. He refused to hand them his money, so he carried the risk himself. And Alice, my sister, my blood, had destroyed it all in one reckless afternoon. I sat in the living room that evening, turning the keys over and over in my hands, feeling their weight like a secret pressed against my palm. Alice sulked upstairs, probably thinking I was planning my revenge. But I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was a mix of dread and inevitability, because sooner or later, Richard would discover what happened. And when he did, Alice wouldn't just be facing my disapproval. She would be facing the full weight of the law. As the night stretched on, I found myself pacing the hallway, staring out the window at Richard's house. His porch light glowed softly, and I imagined him inside, perhaps sipping a drink, perhaps reviewing his day's reports. Did he already know? Was he already watching the footage? My stomach churned with the thought. I thought about telling Alice the truth right then, that the car she had taken wasn't mine, that she had just committed a crime so massive it could ruin her life. But when I went upstairs and saw her sprawled across her bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened, I couldn't bring myself to say a word. She had brought this on herself. She had ignored my warning, stolen what wasn't hers, and laughed in my face when she thought she had won. So I stayed silent. That night, I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. My mind replayed every moment, the slam of the door, the screech of tires, the smell of smoke clinging to Alice's clothes. I knew the storm was coming. I knew Richard would not forgive, nor forget. But for once, it wasn't my responsibility to clean up her mess. This time, Alice would have to face the consequences of her choices. And as much as I loved her, I couldn't deny the smallest flicker of satisfaction that warmed my chest. She thought she had destroyed my life, but she had only destroyed her own. The knock came just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving Denver in a deep purple haze. I had been expecting it all day. Every minute that passed without it felt like a small reprieve, but I knew reprieves never last. Alice had vanished into her room hours earlier, blasting music to drown out her own guilt. I sat in the living room with the keys still in my hand, the weight of them heavy, almost burning. The knock was not gentle. It was firm, deliberate, the kind of knock that makes your chest tighten before you even stand up. I rose slowly, my legs trembling, and opened the door. There he stood, Officer Richard Miller. His uniform was crisp, his face set like stone. Two other officers flanked him, their expressions unreadable, but their presence made the air thick with authority. Richard's eyes flickered toward me for a brief moment, but he didn't linger. He wasn't here for me. His gaze snapped past my shoulder into the house, straight toward the stairs. "Alice Johnson," he called out, his voice steady, commanding, and final. "Come down here, now." For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then footsteps. Slow at first, then quick, nervous. Alice appeared at the top of the staircase, her phone still clutched in her hand, her face pale and drawn. She looked between me and the officers, confusion giving way to fear. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaking. Richard took a step forward, his jaw tightening. "You're under arrest for theft, destruction of property, and reckless endangerment." His voice carried the weight of $2 million in flames, of years of dedication turned to ash. Alice froze.
"What?
"Arrest?" She laughed nervously, glancing at me as though I might explain this absurdity. "That's ridiculous. This has to be some mistake." But Richard wasn't smiling. He nodded to the officers beside him, and they moved closer, their hands ready at their belts. Alice's eyes widened. She looked back at me, panic rising in her voice. Tell them it was your car. They've made a mistake." I said nothing. I simply folded my arms across my chest, holding her gaze with my own steady silence. Inside, my heart pounded, but outside I looked calm. I had no intention of saving her this time. Alice Johnson, Richard continued, you unlawfully entered my vehicle using a duplicate key. You drove recklessly through Denver, crashed into a private building, and set my car on fire. I have footage of every second. At that, Alice's face drained completely of color. Footage, she whispered. Yes, Richard snapped. A hidden camera. Every move you made, every turn of the wheel, recorded. He gestured to the officers. Take her in. Alice staggered back a step as the two officers mounted the stairs. No, this isn't happening. She turned to me again, desperate, her voice breaking.
Please help me.
Say it was your car. Say something. I shook my head slowly. My voice came out low and steady, almost cold.
No, Alice.
Not this time. She blinked at me, stunned, as though my refusal hurt more than the handcuffs snapping around her wrists. The officers pulled her hands behind her back, the metal clinking as it locked into place. Tears welled in her eyes as she twisted toward me. You can't do this, she screamed at Richard. You can't just— I can, he cut her off sharply. And I will. The officers guided her down the stairs, her bare feet stumbling against the wooden steps. She fought them, her cries echoing through the house, but they held firm. She turned her head over her shoulder, her eyes locking on mine one last time. Please, she shouted. You're my sister. You can't just let this happen. But I stood motionless, arms folded, watching as they dragged her through the front door. My heart ached, but my resolve did not waver. For years, I had been her shield, her rescuer, the one who cleaned up her messes. But not anymore. Not with $2 million gone, not with a police officer's life's work destroyed, and not with my own dignity hanging in the balance. Outside, the flashing lights of the police car painted the street in red and blue. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains and front porches, whispering among themselves. Alice thrashed against the officers, but it was useless. They placed her firmly in the back of the squad car, her shouts muffled by the closed door. Richard turned back to me as the car engine started. For the first time that night, his expression softened, though only slightly. You knew, didn't you? He asked. I nodded once. I did. He studied me for a long moment, then exhaled, his jaw loosening. Then you also know what she's facing. This isn't just about a car. This is about responsibility, law, and consequences. I know, I replied quietly. My voice barely carried over the hum of the engine. Richard's eyes lingered on me for another second before he turned away, his boots heavy on the pavement as he walked back to his car. He climbed in, and with a sharp turn of the wheel, the convoy of police vehicles rolled down Maple Street, taking Alice with them. And then it was quiet. I stood in the doorway, staring at the empty street, the silence of the neighborhood pressing in. The house behind me felt colder, lonelier, the shadows stretching across the walls like reminders of everything that had just unraveled. I closed the door slowly, the click of the lock sounding final, like a seal on a chapter one could never undo. For a long time, I sat in the living room in silence. The laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. I thought about Alice, my sister, my family, the girl I had shared secrets with as children under the covers with a flashlight. And yet, she had grown into a woman who burned everything she touched. Still, I didn't cry. I didn't break. Because somewhere inside, I knew this had been inevitable. Alice had been playing with fire for years, and now, finally, she had been burned. When I went to bed that night, the house felt impossibly empty. I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, thinking about the words she had screamed. You're my sister. They echoed in my ears, sharper than any siren, heavier than any verdict. But even as the guilt whispered at me, I reminded myself of the truth. I had given her every chance, every warning, every lifeline. She had chosen this path, not me. And now, the law had simply caught up with her. As I closed my eyes, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The courtroom was colder than I expected. It wasn't the kind of cold that made you shiver. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, the kind that came from silence, judgment, and the heavy presence of truth. I sat in the second row, my hands clasped in my lap, while Alice stood at the front in her plain gray suit, her wrists no longer bound but her future still chained. The judge's voice was steady, measured, and merciless as he read out the sentence: several years in prison for theft, reckless endangerment, and destruction of property. The room seemed to shrink around me. I could hear the shuffle of papers, the faint coughs from spectators, the scratching of pens recording every word. Alice turned her head once, her eyes finding mine. They were filled with something that looked like betrayal, but beneath it, I caught a flicker of fear. It was the same look she had given me when we were children and she had gotten caught sneaking out of the house, begging me to cover for her. Only now, the stakes were higher, and I wasn't there to shield her. As the guards led her away, her shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. My sister, the storm that had always charged through my life, was suddenly small, fragile, and broken. The sound of the door closing behind her echoed like the final chapter of a book. When I walked out of that courthouse into the crisp Denver air, the city felt different. Lighter, somehow, as if a weight I had carried for years had finally been lifted. For the first time, I wasn't responsible for Alice. I wasn't chasing after her mistakes or trying to patch up the holes she left in our lives. The silence around me was no longer frightening, it was freeing. Back at our house on Maple Street, I sat in the living room, staring at the walls that had heard every fight, every plea, every late-night argument with Alice. The house suddenly felt too big, too filled with ghosts of a past I no longer wanted to hold on to. That night, I made my decision. I would sell it. It took months of paperwork, negotiations, and endless tours with potential buyers, but eventually, the house sold. The final check came in at just under $300,000, though after debts and fees, I walked away with about $120,000. Combined with the savings from my steady job, it was enough to start fresh. I packed my belongings, just the essentials. Old photo albums, a few books, clothes, and my favorite mug. Everything else I left behind. As I closed the door one last time, I didn't look back. Maple Street had been the setting for too many battles, too many scars. It was time to let it go. I moved to Chicago, Illinois, a city that felt alive in a way Denver never had. With the money, I bought a cozy apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. It wasn't extravagant, just 2 bedrooms, wooden floors, and a balcony that caught the morning light, but it was mine. Mine alone. No shared arguments, no slammed doors, no laughter turning into shouts. Just quiet, steady peace. The first few weeks in Chicago were a blur of discovery. I walked the streets of the city, letting myself get lost among the towering buildings and bustling crowds. I visited the Art Institute and stared at paintings for hours, marveling at the colors that seemed to tell stories of their own. I drank coffee in tiny corner cafes where no one knew my name, and I liked it that way. I strolled through Millennium Park, listened to street performers, and sat by the lake with the wind tangling my hair. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for someone else. I was living for myself. It wasn't always easy. Some nights, the loneliness crept in. I'd lie awake in my apartment, the city buzzing outside, and think of Alice. I wondered how she was adjusting, if she was angry, or if she finally realized the depth of what she had done. Part of me wanted to write her, to tell her I still loved her despite everything, but each time I picked up a pen, I stopped. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, I leaned into new beginnings. I reconnected with an old friend, Emily, who lived in New York. She invited me to visit, and with the freedom I now had, I booked a ticket without hesitation. In New York, we walked through Central Park, laughed over late-night pizza, and stood at the top of tall buildings watching the city stretch endlessly below us. Emily told me she hadn't seen me this happy in years, and I realized she was right. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every choice I made was mine, every step forward unshadowed by Alice's recklessness. I began saving again, not out of fear, but out of hope. Hope for travel, for a future, maybe even for love. The weight I carried had transformed into something lighter, something like possibility. Alice had always been a storm in my life, unpredictable and destructive, pulling me into chaos I never asked for. But storms, no matter how fierce, always pass. When they do, the sky clears and the air feels new. That's what I held on to in Chicago, that sense of clarity, of renewal. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset spill across Lake Michigan, I realized something important. All those years I had spent laughing at Alice's mistakes, brushing them off, covering for her. I had been using laughter as a shield. Because sometimes laughter is the only answer when the truth is too heavy for tears. But now, I wasn't laughing at pain anymore. I was laughing at the beauty of being free, at the simple joy of watching the sun sink into the water, at the promise of tomorrow. America had always felt big to me, almost too big, filled with roads that stretched farther than I could imagine. But now, I saw it differently. America was not just big, it was endless in its chances. Every street was a beginning, every city a possibility. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to embrace it all. As the last light faded that evening, I whispered into the quiet, "This is my life now." And I smiled, knowing it was true.